Hey guys, some of you playing PoE may not want to follow a build guide per par. You don't want to exactly follow somebody's passive tree. You don't want to exactly follow somebody's gear. It's hard to find on PoE.trade. You keep going back and forth between the trade site, between your main game. This is a very short course on how to craft your own build, how I go about thinking about my own build. And so I just want to start here on number one. The first thing when I think about making my own build is the main skill. You want to look up on YouTube, you want to watch videos, you want to watch the trailer, and say, okay, that skill looks cool. Let's make a build focused around that skill gem. Now, under this category one, there's 5 things to think about. The first thing is to think about is in an attack or a spell. This is incredibly important because you only want to stack one or the other, with the very small caveat of cast on crit. Cast on crit is often an attack, where when you crit, then you cast a spell. Now, if you're doing an attack, you want to scale attack speed, and if you're doing a spell, you want to scale cast speed. Also, hinder can only be from spells, maim can only be from attacks. Cast on crit, like I say, you basically want to up your spell damage. You usually want what you're casting to be upgraded, and then the crit to affect your attacks. Next, you want to think, am I self-casting, or same thing with brand. Brand is basically treated the same way as self-casting. It's just by proxy. You just self-cast by proxy, meaning you can still leech. Anything done by self-cast can be applied by brands. If it's a minion, it's a totally separate entity performing the skills, and it has nothing to do with your passive tree except minion modifiers. And so, like, if you have increased spell damage, that does not apply to your minions unless it says increase minion spell damage. Minions are a separate entity, as if you're in a player party. And so to scale minions, you have to focus on minions. Totems are the next category. It's kind of like a hybrid of the minion and the trap, which I'm about to get to. Totems act like a minion in a way. They're a separate individual. They can be targeted separately. But they use your own stat distribution. Any modifiers to spell damage applies to the totem. Modifiers to crit applies to the totem. Totems also sit still. You can only put them in a certain spot. This leads us to traps. If you want to do a trap build, they activate when an enemy gets within that radius. Mines, on the other hand, are activated when you detonate the mine. Mines and traps can be targeted by area of effect, but they cannot be directly targeted the same way a totem or a minion can. And so, like splash damage, exploding damage and so on can definitely destroy your traps and your mines, but they can't be targeted the same way. But they're not like a brand. They don't count as coming from you, so you cannot leech from a trap, for example. The next thing to think about, are you hitting or are you applying a debuff, like damage over time? Damage over time, you want DOT multiplier, you want increased DOT. Has nothing to do with your hit. It cannot leech, it cannot crit. When it comes to damage over time, you have ailments, like damaging ailments, for example, bleed and poison, both damaging ailments, and then you have non-ailments. Non-ailments are like Wintertide Brand, applies cold damage over time debuff. It's like Soul Rend, it's like Blight. These apply chaos damage over time, which is not poison damage. You can stack both. You have to think about, is it an ailment itself, like poison, or is it a non-ailment DOT? When it's a hit, it can be melee, where you're striking, or it can be a projectile hit. Melee, interestingly, can have range. You can increase your melee strike range. So something like Static Strike can hit from a distance, and it looks like a projectile, but it's not treated like a projectile. It's different modifiers. If you're creating your own build, you want to really pay attention to the gem tags. And that's my first reminder here. Remember your gem tags when you're working on your skill. Melee can fall under the categories of slams, which specific supports can support, or regular, for example, puncture, double strike, and so on. Projectiles can be bow-based, where you have a bow and a quiver, like Ice Shot. Caustic Arrow. Caustic Arrow, for example, has an area of effect. See the star here? You want to think, is it area of effect or not? Something like Ice Shot does not have area of effect. Caustic Arrow does have area of effect. You want to think about duration. How much duration does my brand activate? How much duration does this damage over time debuff occur? You want to keep all this in mind when you're thinking, okay, am I hitting or am I doing a DOT? Then you have like mana on hit. That won't matter if you're applying a debuff. You have non-bow projectiles as well. This is very possible. Wand-based projectiles, for example. Next category, of course, D, you want to think, am I doing elemental damage? Elemental means fire, cold, or lightning. Or am I doing chaos, or am I doing physical? What am I really focusing on? Sometimes you want to focus just on one. You want to scale just your fire damage. And then you want to use something like flammability as a curse. This gets us to point 3 in a second. Otherwise, you want to use something like a prismatic skill, which will apply something at random. You want to do like an elemental hit. You want to do maybe Trinity support, where you want to get multiple kinds of LE damage, because applying one will then buff the damage of the others. Applying a cold damage on a certain strike will then buff the subsequent fire, lightning, etc. Sometimes you want to have multiple, sometimes just one. Sometimes you just want to stack physical. Brutality support, you can only apply physical. Void manipulation, you can only apply chaos. you want to think about overwhelm and penetrate. It sounds very rapey, but penetrate is like elemental penetration. For example, the curse elemental weakness, or just increased cold penetration on your passive tree. Overwhelm can be like overwhelm physical damage reduction. It's like breaking through their armor. Lastly, you want to think E. You want to think, based on, am I doing physical, cold, lightning, etc.? Am I applying bleed, which is a damaging ailment? Am I stunning, which is temporarily, paralyzing the enemy? Poison can be inflicted from physical or chaos. Impale basically means you are hitting somebody, and then subsequent hits will have an increased reflected damage from the initial hit, and you can stack impales. It's a type of reflected damage. Fire can do ignite, which is a DOT as well, or it can do scorch, which lowers the enemy elemental resist. Cold can freeze, which temporarily paralyzes like stun in a way. It can chill, which slows the enemies, or you could do brittle, which affects your critical strikes. Lightning can shock, which increases your damage, or sap, which decreases the enemy's damage, a little bit like enfeeble. After you figure out your main skill in all this section, you want to think about the ascendancy. What synergizes with this skill? Poison, for example, synergizes very well with assassin. If you're doing a bow skill, you might want to think about a Deadeye, especially if you're just starting out. You want something that synergizes with your ascendancy. The third point, curses and auras. Every build should have at least one curse. Many can have multiple curses. You can get this from your passive tree. You can get this from your anointment. You can anoint with an oil on your amulet to get Whispers of Doom. You can use gear. You can use Vixen entrapment gloves. There's a lot of ways to get extra curses. Occultist ascendancy, Scion ascendancy, etc. Auras, you want to stack as much as you can, but they eat up your mana reservation unless you use tricks. You want to use Pride with physical damage. You want to use Wrath with lightning damage, so on. Next, you want to think, am I really intelligence-based? Do I want to work on my mana and energy shield? Am I evasion-based, the green stuff? Am I dexterity, which is my evasion rating, and my accuracy rating? Am I armor-based, which is my defense, which is my life, gives me a little bit more life? You want to next, after you go through, this is in order, by the way, main skill, ascendancy, curses, auras. You want to think about, what am I doing, intelligence, dex. Next, you want to think, what cluster jewels do I need? You want to really research the cluster jewels, since 3.10, very important, very helpful, significantly helpful compared to just using the passive tree alone. Only now, at 0.6, do I really think about my gear? Do I really think about, min-maxing? Because you have your leveling gear, sure, but then you get to endgame. Now you can actually equip gear because you're high enough level, you have enough attributes. You want to think, okay, what gear do I really want to synergize all this stuff? Am I ailment-based? Am I duration? AoE, am I cold? Whatever. Spell suppression is the last thing you want to think about because that mitigates damage you take from spells. Very helpful. Next point here, last reminder, cap LA resist to 75%. You want to do this in Act 6. You want to make sure your LA resists are all capped to 75% and your chaos resist is 0% or higher. If you're CI, it'll be 100%. Otherwise, you want above 0%. Doesn't have to be 60%. Doesn't have to be 30%. Always have boots with 30% to 35% movement speed. You want to scale your energy shield or your life. Sometimes you want both, but generally you want to focus on one or the other because one will be more strength-based, one will be more intelligence-based. For example, Zealot's Oath 2, you want regeneration applying to your energy shield as opposed to your life regeneration. Remember that Leech has a cap. You have your Leech. You can just keep getting more and more Leech, but it's not going to be doing anything unless you have plus to your maximum Leech. Very important to think about. Maximum Leech. It's all there under the character screen. You want to think, do I want a passive regeneration or do I want recharge rate? Recharge rate can be the faster starter recharge rate for your energy shield, which means how quickly it activates after you take damage. You take a hit, boom, damage taken. How long does it take to start recharging that? And then you have the actual recharge rate. When it starts, how fast does it blow up? How fast does it go back to normal? And so you want it to start fast. You want it to regenerate very quickly before you take another hit. Except situations like Val Discipline, Wicked Ward, etc. You have to think about your mana. You're going to have mana burn unless you have mana regeneration, mana leech, mana on hit, mana on kill. You have to put that in mind. Remember, if you add it to your tree early on, you can get rid of it later with Orbs of Regret. Lastly, you want to think about your power, frenzy, or endurance charges. Power charges give you crit chance. Frenzy charges give you attack or cast speed and movement speed. Very helpful. Endurance charges give you a little bit of LA resist, but mostly give you physical damage reduction. This is a general overview. I wanted to have a little course here. If you're an experienced player, it's all stuff you've heard before. If you're newer to the game, I hope it's helpful. And have a good one.